Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. I'm going to walk you through some key ratios and metrics. My agenda is to talk about ratios. I'll talk at a very high level. I'll talk about how I've used them in the past. I'll talk about how organizations are using them. There is a lot of different ratios out there. You could go through numerous ones, but the reality is this: as I go through this presentation, you have to be targeted at what ratios make the most sense. Here's a bit about myself, including my experience, my accomplishments, and where some of my involvements over the last last 35 years. What are key ratios? In a bottom line, they're metrics. They're key financial operational metrics that you establish to look at how you're performing. When we start looking at certain ratios, they're based on accounting data. So if you look at a quick ratio or a current ratio, they're taking those pieces from the balance sheet and you're calculating. You look at a sales margin calculation, that's historical. EPS, earnings per share, again, it's based on accounting data. We could also have operational metrics like fill rates. You could have situations where customer service levels, right? So it really comes down to the overall manage the health of the financial position in the business as a whole. The challenge with ratios in general, a lot of them are based on historical data, accounting data. It doesn't necessarily mean they're an indication of where you're going to be 1, 3, 5 years out. So you kind of want to look at those targets and where you plan to attend. Sometimes it's best to also look at these ratios in regards to how you're performing against your peers and other companies within the market. So it's very good to kind of do this. So you want to make sure you truly understand what you're measuring and what it makes the most sense to in terms of the overall output of driving results for your operational, business, and regulatory reporting cycles. These are the top ratios that I've seen used. I won't go through each one, but you can see here a lot of them are coverage. You look at price book ratios. A lot of them are stuff you see at a corporate level. I'll get in more specifics around the business unit level because of the way the balance sheet and the income statements are constructed. There's only certain ways you can pull ratios together. When we talk about organizations, we got to talk about them in specific functionality. You have the business unit level, you have the corporate level. So the business unit will roll up into the corporate level. The corporate's going to consolidate everything together in terms of the investor presentations, in terms of the quarterly and annual reports, where the business unit is going to have responsibility at its span of management, which typically is a local level, and that could be plants, stores, warehousing. And they'll be looking at specific ratios down there that they have control over, which is typically days sales outstanding, inventory turns, sales per employee, sales per day, those metrics they do, because situations like on the equity side and the debt side of the balance sheet don't typically flow down to a business unit level. At the corporate level, you're rolling up all the business unit level cost centers all the way up, and you're consolidating them, and you're going to give the consolidation version of your DSO, your inventory turns, your EPS, because you have that control and you're consolidating everything up. Here's things what I've seen over the years, and I've been involved with this stuff over the years and calculations. But typically, EBITDA is the big area what they like to show. Earnings before interest and taxes, EBIT, free cash flow, earnings per share, return, sales outstanding. These are the type of high level metrics you do. So a lot of organizations will have these rolled up. Some of them will report them within their investor presentations or as part of their their month-end quarterly reports, annual reports to the boards or their internal meetings. They'll report this as well. I use 3M just to give you an example of what they were looking at in terms of performance. And they're basically looking at sales and operating margins on percentages. And they're also telling you how they achieved year over year by their division. And then they're looking at their earnings per share, what's changed between quarter to quarter in terms of their EPS. I also then pulled down some key metrics, and you can do this and Google them, but it gives you a good example how they compare as a company to the industry. A lot of this information is available if you Google it. There's no sense reinventing the wheel, as I've always instructed to my clients and others. You can always look at this information and Google it and compare it. It doesn't stop you from putting it in a spreadsheet or build a report off it. It just makes you kind of pull everything together. This is just giving you an example of business unit level. I'll use Air Products for example because they would have store packaged gas facilities and air separation plants, but this gives you an idea where I focused on, which was, accounts receivable, inventory, day sales outstanding, but it basically gives you what they have a lot more control over in terms of operational metrics. Uh, this gives you an idea in terms of the ratios themselves, in terms of how they're viewed and how they're pulled together. I won't spend a lot of time. I'll just leave it up here for a second. I'll speak to a high level. Because of the way, as I've said, the balance sheet is constructed, key accounts don't necessarily flow down to the business unit level, so they're meaningless. However, at a corporate level, everything is basically consolidated up and you have all the pieces. Can't have a discussion without talking about macro micro indicators because everybody does variance analysis. That's basically between your static or your actual and your last forecast. You're kind of looking at the gap. However, you should also be looking at external metrics, and these it could be publicly traded data, data that's from like government sites, GDP stats, or automotive sales, just to give you an idea what's going on in the trend. So if you're seeing a 5% drop on automotive sales, and that's a major unit of yours, how's that unit performing? Is it achieving or is it lagging? Is there a particular customer? It allows you to do more investigation. In summary, the key to ratios is establishing the right metrics. You don't need 50 ratios. What you should be doing is targeting the specific ratios that make the most sense to you to drive the best outcomes. Ratios in the past typically were used to basically do analytical procedures. I used them quite a bit to do some testing. It doesn't mean they don't use them the same. They're still used, a lot of cases, still for analytical positions. The key to metrics and ratios is changing the behavior, driving the results. The FP&A teams play an instrumental part of driving changes at their local business unit level or at the corporate level. The general ledger structure itself makes it difficult for some ratios to be used or in some cases meaningful at a business unit level. Revisiting ratios and metrics is critical depending on how you're doing your compensation plans, depending on how you're looking at your metrics of where you want to target. It's critical because over the last few years I've seen a lot more operational savings taken on. AI, of course, has risen in terms of deployments and options, so it's all about assessments, and I've recommended to my clients over the years to do a health assessment of their reporting system to make sure it's aligning to their objectives. Thank you. Here's some ways to get a hold of me and some additional blogs and all that. Thank you.